Hello, Bible readers. There are three distinct parts to Psalm 24. The first two verses are a hymn of praise. The next three verses are an entrance liturgy of sorts, kind of like Psalm 15 was. Like, if you remember that post, I talked about how Psalm 15 probably served two purposes at the same time. One is a worship litany, and the other is an educational tool. People might have known the 10 requirements for entry into the temple from Psalm 15, kind of like we Christians know the 10 commandments and kind of commit those to memory. Well, Psalm 24 acts like that, talking about what it takes to be allowed to enter into the place of worship. Verses 3 to 6 ask, who gets to ascend the holy hill? So this is the part that's like Psalm 15. Who gets to stand in the holy place? And then the third part of Psalm 24, so hymn of praise, and then the part that's like Psalm 15, verses 3 to 6. Then verses 7 to 10, well, there's something else altogether. Many interpreters think, not that they're not connected to the other two parts of Psalm 24, but it's a very distinct turn there, right? So many interpreters think these are the words that maybe were said as Israel would process the Ark of the Covenant into the temple. David brought it in 2 Samuel chapter 6 with a festive procession. Obviously, something was said when that procession arrived at the temple. Maybe these were the words that they said at that event. Or maybe this was written after as a kind of reenactment of that event. What's interesting is it's not obvious whether we should figure out what a psalm means in order to determine how they used it, or whether it might be helpful to try to imagine how they used it in order to understand what it means. It's kind of a chicken and egg kind of thing. Interpretation it's tricky. The gates and the doors are addressed in the last part of Psalm 24, so that the King of Glory may come in. Well, think of ancient days. The door, the gate, these are actually quite important ways to secure something, right? You don't raise the door or open the gate for just anybody. Think of a walled-in fortress, and really the temple kind of is that. Opening the place up for a returning triumphant king would have been a dramatic moment. Kind of makes me think of it's funny that this is what it makes me think of, but it makes me think of when we do weddings at First Lutheran after the bridal party has entered and all things are set up front, including the flower girl, if there is one, and a ring bearer, if there is one. They've all come in. Well, once that all happens, once everybody's all gathered up front, we close the doors to the sanctuary where everybody in the bridal party has just entered through. And then I say to everyone in the sanctuary, would the assembly please rise? And everybody stands, and the music typically changes from whatever was being played for the bridal party as they came in to whatever the bride is processing into. And then, as the music changes, the doors open and the groom sees his bride as she makes her way into the worship space. It's very dramatic. It's very on purpose, because it's a moment worthy of like, ta-da, Well, Israel would want to create something as dramatic as possible for that moment when the Ark of the Covenant is brought into the temple. And maybe these were the words that they used, verses 7 to 10 of Psalm 24. But that's, of course, just the last few verses. The first two parts of this psalm are setting up why this God is to be worshipped and who gets to enter this space to be in God's presence. Genesis and Exodus do something that Psalm 24 tries to echo, that creation is made complete, like final, and it was good, very good, when the tabernacle is completed. God's dwelling place in creation is the capstone of creation, if you will. And what is celebrated in Genesis and Exodus And again, here is that God and no other created the world and did so by overcoming the powers of chaos. You know, that Genesis 1 understanding of there was a darkness and light came into it, and God is responsible for doing that. Hebrew stories often represent chaos with the sea or sea creatures, sea monsters, storms at sea. In this case, in Psalm 24, with seas and rivers. For God has founded creation on the seas and established it on the rivers. This would be like saying a president made peace in response to war, or that God brought life from death, like taking something and then turning it on its head. Well, once God is praised like this, we get it. Who gets to praise God in the holy place? And of course, the answer is about people of moral integrity, one's ethics, one's behaviors. That's what determines who is welcome. Imagine being unwelcome to the temple. We Christians know New Testament stories where people are left out, cast out from the community for being a leper or a demoniac or blind or whatever. It's like, and when you see what being in the temple means and how you are a part of a community, to be cast out, it's a big deal. It would be like being cast out into the chaos, unwelcome to enter the peace and order of God's temple. Which makes me wonder, how do I pray this one? You know, it's interesting, following up on Psalm 22 and 23, two of my favorite, two of the most powerful Psalms. And then I come to this one, and it feels pretty exclusive, distant from my preferred metaphors as to how I imagine God. I don't typically think of God as this triumphant, almost like knighted-looking king-type warrior person. But this is what Bonhoeffer was talking about, I think, when I mentioned early on in our deep dive into the Psalms, that the way he thinks about praying the Psalms was he'd remember David prayed these Psalms, Jesus prayed the Psalms of David, and we praise these Psalms after Jesus, with Jesus, and through Jesus. Bonhoeffer would ask, how does this psalm sound when prayed from the lips of Jesus? And that would help him. So that it actually helps me in this one too, because then I remember Jesus was praying that God did subjugate chaos, that God, the triumphant king, does deserve a dramatic entrance upon return from war against the enemy, which, you know, we believe the forces of good are always fighting against the forces of evil. And that those who gather to greet the triumphant king are ready in mind and in spirit to recognize the moment, to appreciate the significance of who the king is and what the king does. Like, how we can read this is by remembering that Jesus read it too, prayed it too. How do you read the psalm differently as you remember that Jesus prayed it? I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.